A powerful rancher shoves a black ranch hand into a river full of alligators to silence her, but minutes later, he was the one begging for his life on camera. The air was thick with the humid Louisiana heat and unspoken menace. Clayton Thorne's voice was low and cold, a chilling contrast to the sweat beading on his forehead. "This is what happens to people who don't know their place, Dara." His two foremen stood behind him, arms crossed, their faces grim masks. A small crowd of onlookers, a mix of curious and fearful townspeople, held up their phones, the small red recording dots blinking in the harsh sunlight. Dara Jackson stood her ground on the muddy riverbank, her chin held high, her eyes never leaving Clayton's. He took a final deliberate step forward and shoved her hard in the chest. A collective gasp went through the crowd as Dara stumbled backward, her boots losing their grip on the slippery earth. She fell into the dark, murky water of the Blackwater Bayou with a heavy splash. Before we find out how she survives this nightmare, if you believe that the truth must always come out, smash that like button, subscribe for more incredible stories of justice, and comment with your city and the word justice below. Let's see how many of us stand for what's right. Dara Jackson was 28 years old, and her family had worked the lands around Blackwater Creek for 5 generations. She wasn't just an employee at the Thorne Cattle Ranch, she was a part of the landscape itself. She understood the rhythm of the seasons, the language of the animals, and the secrets of the bayou better than anyone. She could read the water's currents from the ripple on the surface and knew the patterns of the alligators that called the bayou home. She was respected for her skill and her unwavering work ethic, a quiet force of competence in a world run by loud, powerful men. Her boss, Clayton Thorne, was one of those men. He had inherited the largest ranch in the parish from his father and ran it with an iron fist and a profound sense of entitlement. To Clayton, the land, the cattle, and the people who worked for him were all just assets on a balance sheet. He was a man who believed rules were for other people, and his wealth had always insulated him from consequences. For months, he had been cutting costs by dumping industrial-grade pesticides and chemical runoff from his large-scale cattle operation directly into a tributary that fed the Blackwater Bayou. The problem started subtly. A few cows in a distant pasture fell sick with an unexplainable illness. Then Dara noticed a strange, oily sheen on the water of the creek where the animals drank. The fish in the bayou started floating to the surface, their bodies pale and lifeless. The vibrant ecosystem she had known her whole life was growing silent and sick. Dara knew the source had to be the ranch. She brought her concerns to Clayton, pointing out the signs and suggesting they test the water. He had laughed in her face. "You're a ranch hand, Dara, not a scientist," he'd sneered. "Worry about mending fences, not my business practices." But Dara couldn't let it go. The bayou was her home, and the people of Blackwater Creek, many of whom relied on the river for fishing, were getting sick too. So she took matters into her own hands. Late one night, she secretly collected water samples from the runoff pipe hidden behind a cluster of old cypress trees. She packaged them carefully and sent them to the Environmental Protection Agency with an anonymous letter. 2 weeks later, an EPA investigator made a surprise visit to the Thorne Cattle Ranch. Clayton was furious. It didn't take him long to figure out who was responsible. Through a friend in the local sheriff's office, he learned the tip-off had been specific, detailed, and pointed directly to a location only his employees would know. There was only one person with the knowledge and the courage to defy him. He decided he wouldn't just fire her. He would make an example of her. He would humiliate her in a way the whole town would remember, ensuring no one ever crossed him again. He brought her to the riverbank, the very place she was trying to protect, intending for it to be the stage for her final, terrifying lesson. He thought the river, with its hidden dangers and lurking predators, was his perfect weapon. What he failed to realize was that he was delivering his enemy to her greatest ally. When a man with all the power tries to erase a woman with nothing but the truth, who really ends up getting eaten alive? The cold of the Blackwater Bayou was a violent shock, stealing the air from Dara's lungs. For a moment, she was just a falling body in a dark, wet world. The murky water closed over her head, silencing the jeers and gasps from the riverbank. But panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Decades of instinct, passed down from her grandfather, who had taught her to swim in these very waters, took over. She didn't fight or thrash. Thrashing was what dying prey did. Thrashing was an invitation. Instead, she let her heavy work boots pull her down, using the river's own current to drift a few feet away from her entry point. On the bank, Clayton Thorne laughed. It was a loud, ugly sound that cut through the nervous silence of the crowd. "Well, looks like she's getting a real taste of the water she was so worried about," he said to his foreman, Hank. "Get this on camera, boys. This is a lesson in loyalty." Hank nodded, his face unreadable, but his phone was steady, pointed directly at the spot where Dara had disappeared. The crowd shuffled their feet, their own phones still recording. They were witnesses, complicit in their silence, trapped between fear of Clayton and the horror unfolding before them. Beneath the surface, Dara opened her eyes. The world was a brown-green blur, but she didn't need to see. She could feel the river. She felt the subtle shift in the current around a submerged cypress stump to her left. She felt the vibration of something heavy moving through the water about 20 yards downstream. Old Man Cypress, the dominant bull alligator in this stretch of the bayou. She knew his patterns, knew his territory began just beyond the bend. Clayton, in his arrogance, had chosen the perfect spot, a neutral zone between two territories where any large gator would investigate a disturbance. Dara's lungs began to burn. She needed air. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed off the muddy bottom, surfacing with minimal sound. Only her eyes and nose broke the water's surface, camouflaged amongst the floating algae and debris. She looked like a piece of driftwood. From the bank, she was nearly invisible. A few people in the crowd pointed. "There, I think I see her." Clayton squinted, a scowl forming on his face. This wasn't the dramatic, screaming spectacle he had envisioned. "What is she doing? Just floating there?" He turned to his other foreman, a younger man named Marcus. "Throw a rock over there, let's liven things up." Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second, his conscience warring with his paycheck. But a sharp glare from Clayton was all it took. He picked up a fist-sized rock and hurled it into the water, landing it with a loud plunk just a few feet from Dara's head. The splash was exactly the dinner bell Dara knew it would be. The vibration in the water changed instantly. Old Man Cypress was on his way. She saw the telltale V-shaped wake cutting through the water, heading not for her, but for the source of the commotion. This was the first part of her plan. She had to separate herself from the perceived threat. While the gator was distracted by the splash, Dara used a slow, powerful breaststroke, her movements economical and silent, to propel herself towards the opposite bank. Not to escape, but to reposition. The far bank was a tangled mess of cypress knees and mangrove roots, a place no sane person would try to climb, but it offered cover. "He's coming for her now!" Someone in the crowd yelled, a note of grim satisfaction in their voice. Clayton smiled again, raising his own phone to film the climax. This is it, the grand finale. The alligator, a monstrous creature easily 12 feet long, slid through the water with terrifying speed. Its cold, reptilian eyes were fixed on the area where the rock had landed. It saw Dara's slow movement and began to alter its course, angling towards her. Clayton's smile widened. This was the justice he wanted, the natural order as he saw it, restoring itself. But Dara wasn't swimming away from the gator. She was swimming parallel to it, keeping a precise distance. She knew something about Old Man Cypress that Clayton and his audience didn't. He was old, powerful, but half-blind in his right eye from a fight with a rival years ago. She was carefully positioning herself on his weak side. As she reached the tangled roots of the far bank, she didn't try to pull herself out. Instead, she submerged again, grabbing onto a thick, submerged root to anchor herself. The crowd on the bank gasped, thinking the alligator had pulled her under. Clayton let out a whoop of victory. "It's over," he shouted. But it wasn't. Dara was now hidden, holding her breath, waiting. The alligator, confused by the loss of its target, slowed its advance and began to circle in the open water right in front of the bank, where Clayton Thorne stood, triumphant and exposed. On the riverbank, Clayton Thorne lowered his phone, a triumphant sneer on his face. "And that," he announced to the silent crowd, "is what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you." He turned to Hank. "Let's go. The show's over." Hank nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the swirling water. The crowd didn't disperse. They kept filming, their lenses focused on the massive alligator that was now gliding slowly, almost lazily, in the center of the bayou. It seemed agitated, its head swiveling, searching for the source of the disturbance that had vanished. Then a ripple broke the surface near the far bank, close to the tangled cypress roots. It was so small that at first only a few people noticed. Then Dara's head emerged. She was silent, her breathing controlled, her wet hair slicked back. She didn't look panicked or defeated, she looked patient. Her eyes, dark and intense, were locked directly on Clayton Thorne. A murmur went through the crowd. Phones that had been lowered were quickly raised again. Clayton froze mid-step, his back still to the river. "What is it?" he demanded, annoyed by the sudden noise. Marcus, his face pale, simply pointed a trembling finger. "Boss, look." Clayton turned, his sneer vanished, replaced by a look of pure disbelief. "What? How?" he stammered. He took an involuntary step back from the river's edge. Dara's voice carried clearly across the water. It was calm, steady, and devoid of fear. "You wanted a show, Clayton?" she called out. "You're going to get one." Before he could respond, she did something no one expected. She lifted her right hand and slapped the flat of her palm against the water's surface. The sound was sharp, loud, like a whip crack echoing across the bayou. Smack! It was a sound that mimics a struggling animal, a dinner bell for any predator in the water. The reaction from Old Man Cypress was instantaneous and terrifying. The alligator spun in the water, its massive body moving with explosive speed. Its eyes, which had been scanning the area where Dara disappeared, now locked onto the source of the new sound, the bank where Clayton and his men were standing. The gator saw the figures silhouetted against the sky, the largest and most prominent shapes in its field of vision. It saw a threat. It saw a target. "What did you do?" Clayton shrieked, his voice cracking with the first hint of genuine fear. Dara didn't answer. She simply watched as the alligator lowered its head, its powerful tail beginning to pump, propelling it forward. It wasn't gliding anymore. It was charging. The V-shaped wake it created was now a churning wave. Panic erupted on the bank. The crowd scrambled backward, a wave of bodies moving away from the water, but not a single person stopped recording. Hank and Marcus took several steps back, their eyes wide with terror, but Clayton was too close to the edge. The muddy ground, which had been Dara's undoing, was now his prison. He tried to scramble back, but his expensive leather boots slipped on the wet clay. He flailed, pinwheeling his arms, and landed hard on his backside, just feet from the water's edge. "Help me!" he screamed at his foreman. "Do something!" Hank stood frozen, his face a mask of shock. Marcus looked from his boss to the charging alligator and back again, seemingly paralyzed. They were paid to intimidate people, not to fight a 12-foot reptile. The alligator was closing the distance with horrifying speed. It was now less than 30 feet away, its massive jaws slightly agape, revealing rows of thick, yellowed teeth. It was a primeval engine of destruction, and it was aimed directly at the man who had desecrated its home. Clayton crab-walked backward, his hands sinking into the foul-smelling mud. His expensive suit was ruined, his face smeared with dirt and terror. The powerful, untouchable rancher was gone. In his place was a terrified man staring at his own mortality. "Dara, call it off!" he begged, his voice a pathetic whine. "Please, I'll do anything!" From across the water, Dara remained perfectly still, a silent judge watching the sentence she had orchestrated unfold. She had turned his stage into a cage, his weapon into her instrument of justice. He was no longer the rancher. He was prey, and the entire town, with their cameras rolling, was watching. The alligator was 10 feet from the bank when Dara's voice cut through Clayton's pathetic pleas. "Confess," she said, her voice echoing with cold authority. "Tell them what you did. Tell them all." Clayton stared at her, his mind struggling to process the command through his terror. "What? Are you crazy? I'll pay you. I'll give you anything you want. Just call it off." "I don't want your money," Dara shot back. "I want the truth. I want everyone here to know why this river is dying, why people are getting sick. Tell them about the runoff pipe. Tell them about the chemicals." The alligator didn't wait for his decision. With a final explosive surge of its tail, it launched itself partially onto the muddy bank. It wasn't a full-body lunge, but a terrifying display of power. Its front legs clawed at the mud, and its massive head, slick with dark water, was now on land, inches from Clayton's flailing legs. The sound of its jaws snapping shut was like a car door slamming, a percussive thump that made the crowd flinch as one. Clayton screamed, a raw, high-pitched sound of pure animal fear as he scrambled backward, kicking mud into the creature's face. The gator hissed, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the ground. It was agitated, territorial, and focused on the panicked man who reeked of fear. "Hank, Marcus, shoot it!" Clayton shrieked, his eyes darting wildly toward his men. "Do your damn jobs!" Hank stood like a statue, his phone still in his hand, but his arm had gone limp. He was no longer recording, he was just watching his boss's empire crumble in real time. It was Marcus who moved, but he didn't move forward. He took 2 deliberate steps back, shaking his head. "No, sir," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I ain't dying for this, not for you." The betrayal in Clayton's eyes was absolute. His last line of defense, the loyalty he had bought and paid for, had just evaporated. He was utterly alone, trapped between an ancient predator and the woman he had tried to destroy. The cameras were all still on him, a jury of a dozen tiny lenses capturing his complete unraveling. "Tell them, Clayton," Dara commanded again, her voice rising. "Or so help me, I will let this river claim what you owe it, now." That was what finally broke him, the certainty in her voice, the finality of his abandonment, the cold reptilian eyes of the beast staring into his soul. "I did it," he screamed, the words tumbling out in a sob. "I did it. I used the runoff pipe behind the cypress grove. I dumped the pesticides in the water." The confession was a torrent now, unstoppable. It was cheaper than proper disposal. The cattle were getting sick, but I covered it up. I paid off the inspector last year. I poisoned this river. Each admission was met with audible gasps from the crowd. People started talking over each other, their shock turning to anger. The whispers became a low roar of condemnation. They weren't just watching a man get his comeuppance. They were hearing a confession to crimes that had affected their own families, their own health, their own livelihoods. Clayton was sobbing openly now, a pathetic, mud-caked figure. "I'm sorry, please, I'm sorry, make it stop." Dara had what she needed. The confession was public, undeniable, and recorded from a dozen different angles. Her justice wasn't about watching him die. It was about watching his world burn down with the truth. With the same calm deliberation as before, she reached out and slapped the water's surface again, but this time she slapped it further downriver, away from the bank. Smack! A second sharp crack echoed through the air. The alligator, its primal instincts drawn to the new, more distinct sound of potential prey, immediately disengaged from Clayton. Its reptilian brain prioritized the easier, more familiar signal. It slid back off the mud, its massive body slipping effortlessly into the water, and turned, swimming toward the new disturbance. It wasn't retreating. It was simply being redirected by a master of its environment. As the creature swam away, a profound silence fell over the riverbank, broken only by Clayton Thorne's ragged sobs. All eyes shifted from the disgraced rancher to the woman across the water. Slowly, using the strength in her arms, Dara Jackson pulled herself out of the Blackwater Bayou. She rose from the water, not as a victim who had been pushed, but as a warrior who had emerged victorious. She stood on the far bank, dripping, exhausted, but unbroken, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, her foreman, and finally the broken man who had tried to silence her. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the bayou against the shore and Clayton Thorne's choked, pathetic sobs. He was a heap of ruined ambition in the mud. Across the water, Dara stood, her silhouette powerful against the fading afternoon light. The phones in the crowd remained raised, but they were no longer filming an execution, they were documenting a reckoning. The spell was broken by an old man in fishing waders who stepped forward from the crowd. His name was Earl Boudreaux, and he'd fished this bayou his entire life. His face was a knot of fury. "My grandson's been sick for 6 months, you son of a bitch," he yelled, his voice cracking with a grief that had finally found its target. "The doctors couldn't figure it out. You did this." That single voice opened the floodgates. A woman shouted, "Our well water tastes like metal." Another man added, "The fish are all gone. You ruined everything." The fear that had kept them silent for so long was burned away by the heat of their collective anger. They began to advance, a slow, menacing wave of righteous fury moving toward the man who had poisoned them. Clayton scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of terror. "Stay back, all of you," he shrieked, pointing a muddy finger. "I'll have you all arrested for trespassing." It was then that Hank, the stoic foreman, made his decision. He looked at Clayton, then at the angry crowd, then at Dara across the water. Without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. His loyalty had a price, and this was far too high. Marcus, however, did something different. He walked to the edge of the water, not toward Clayton, but in the direction Dara would need to walk to get back. He watched her, waiting. He had made his choice. Dara began to walk along the tangled bank, her movements sure-footed even in her exhaustion. She found a spot where an old fallen log created a partial bridge and made her way back across the bayou, downstream from the scene. The crowd parted for her as she approached, their angry shouts softening into murmurs of respect and awe. They saw the mud and river scum clinging to her, but they also saw the unbreakable strength that had brought her back from a watery grave. As she stepped onto the main path, Marcus met her. He shrugged off his own flannel jacket and held it out to her. "Miss Jackson," he said, his voice low, "I'm sorry for all of it." Dara looked at the jacket, then into his eyes. She saw fear, but also a glimmer of genuine remorse. She took the jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders without a word. Her acceptance was his absolution. Just then, the distant wail of a siren cut through the air, growing steadily closer. Clayton's face lit up with a flicker of his old arrogance. "That's right, Sheriff Brody is on his way. You're all going to jail, especially you," he snarled at Dara. "Attempted murder, assault." A single sheriff's car came barreling down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust. A large, red-faced man with a drooping mustache stepped out. This was Sheriff Brody, a man whose re-election campaigns had been generously funded by the Thorne family for years. "What in the hell is going on here?" Brody boomed, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. His eyes immediately found Clayton. "Clayton, you all right?" "No, I'm not all right, you fool," Clayton spat. "This woman," he pointed a trembling finger at Dara, "tried to kill me. She used an alligator. Arrest her." Sheriff Brody turned his gaze on Dara, his expression hardened. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me. You're under arrest for—" He never finished the sentence. Earl Boudreaux stepped directly in front of him, blocking his path to Dara. "You ain't touching her, Brody. Get out of my way, Earl," the sheriff warned. Then the woman who had complained about her well water stepped next to Earl. Then another man. Within seconds, a human wall had formed between the sheriff and Dara. They were no longer a fearful crowd. They were a community united. "What is this?" Brody demanded, his hand now gripping his pistol. "This is an unlawful assembly." "No, Sheriff," said a young woman holding up her phone, the screen glowing brightly. "This is evidence." On her screen, Clayton's terrified, screaming confession was playing on a loop. "I did it. I poisoned this river." Then, one by one, the other phones were held up. A dozen screens, all playing the same video, the same confession, from different angles. The clearing was filled with the sound of Clayton Thorne's voice, a chorus of his own damnation. Sheriff Brody stared at the sea of screens, his face draining of color. He looked from the undeniable video evidence to his benefactor Clayton, and then to the silent, resolute woman wrapped in a borrowed jacket. The power he had always taken for granted had just vanished into dozens of digital files, ready to be uploaded to the world. Sheriff Brody's face went from red to a sickly pale. The blustering authority drained out of him, replaced by the cold, hard calculation of a man trying to save his own skin. He wasn't looking at a crowd of angry locals anymore. He was looking at a dozen viral videos in the making, a career-ending firestorm that was already out of his control. His hand dropped from his pistol as if it had been burned. The chorus of Clayton's confession, playing from the phones, was a death knell for the old way of doing things. He took a slow, deliberate breath, his eyes darting from the phones to Clayton's pathetic, mud-stained figure. The choice was brutally simple: go down with the sinking ship or be the one to arrest the captain. "Brody, what are you waiting for?" Clayton snarled, a hint of his old command returning. "Arrest this woman and confiscate those phones. That's an order." The sheriff looked at Clayton, and for the first time in their long transactional relationship, there was no deference in his eyes. There was only contempt. "You're not in a position to give orders, Clayton." He turned and faced the crowd, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "All right, everyone, calm down. I see what's happened here." He then turned back to Clayton, his voice now booming with manufactured righteousness. "Clayton Thorne," he said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for illegal dumping of hazardous materials, reckless endangerment and—" He paused, looking directly at Dara, then back at Clayton. "Assault!" Clayton's jaw dropped. He stared in utter disbelief as the sheriff he owned, the man who was supposed to be his pocket protection, advanced on him. "What? Brody? Have you lost your mind? I'll have your badge for this. I'll ruin you." "Sounds to me like you've got enough problems of your own," Brody said flatly, grabbing Clayton's arm and twisting it behind his back with practiced force. Clayton yelped in pain as the first cuff clicked shut around his wrist. The sound was unnaturally loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over the crowd. "You can't do this!" Clayton shrieked, struggling uselessly. "I am this town! I own you!" Brody snapped the second cuff on and hauled Clayton to his feet. "You don't own me anymore," he said, his voice low enough that only Clayton could hear. "You just became a political liability." He shoved Clayton toward the patrol car, the disgraced rancher stumbling in the mud. The crowd watched, mesmerized. Their oppressor, the man who had loomed over their lives for decades, was being frog-marched away in handcuffs. The victory was so sudden, so total, that it was almost hard to believe. As Brody pushed Clayton toward the back of the car, Dara stepped forward. She moved with a quiet grace, the borrowed jacket hanging from her shoulders. She stopped just a few feet from Clayton, forcing him to look at her. His eyes were filled with a venomous, impotent rage. "You think you've won?" he hissed, his voice a ragged whisper. "My lawyers will have me out by morning, and then I'm coming for you." Dara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "The river always collects its debts, Clayton," she said, her voice calm and final. "You just made your first down payment." She turned away before he could respond, leaving him to be shoved unceremoniously into the back of the patrol car. As the door slammed shut, the young woman who had first shown the sheriff her phone called out, "We're sending these videos to the news station in Baton Rouge, Sheriff, and the EPA, and everyone else." Brody froze for a second, then nodded grimly. "All evidence should be submitted to the proper authorities," he said, trying to sound official. "I'll need to take one of those phones as evidence for the official report." He pointed at a young man nearby. The crowd murmured, a wave of suspicion rippling through them. They knew he was trying to control the narrative. "No need, Sheriff," Earl Boudreaux said, stepping forward. "We've already started a group chat. The evidence is secure." He gave Brody a hard stare. Every last second of it. A defeated, Brody simply got in his car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and the ghost of a fallen empire behind. For a moment, the crowd stood in silence. Then a single person began to clap. Then another and another, until the riverbank was filled with a thunderous applause. It wasn't for the sheriff. It was for Dara. They surrounded her, not crowding her, but forming a protective circle. They offered her a ride home, a dry change of clothes, a hot meal. She just nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from terror to triumph. She had gone to that riverbank alone, expecting to be humiliated or worse. She had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a hero. She looked at the faces around her, people she'd known her whole life, people who had been too afraid to speak up. Today, they had found their voice. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was only the beginning. The battle was won, but the war for Blackwater Bayou had just begun, undefined. The ride back to town in Earl Boudreaux's old pickup truck was mostly silent. Dara sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in Marcus's flannel jacket, the damp chill from the bayou still clinging to her bones. She stared out the window at the passing cypress trees, their familiar shapes looking different now, like silent witnesses. Earl drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while his wife Martha sat between them, occasionally patting Dara's arm in a gesture of quiet, maternal comfort. They didn't ask her to recount what happened. They didn't need to. They had seen it. They had filmed it. They didn't take her home. Instead, Earl drove to his own small, tidy house on the edge of town. Inside, a half-dozen other people from the riverbank were already gathered in the living room, their faces a mixture of grim determination and nervous energy. The young woman who had confronted Sheriff Brody was there, her phone plugged into a charger on the kitchen counter, as if it were a vital piece of equipment. Marcus, the former foreman, sat awkwardly on a stool in the corner, nursing a bottle of water. A man without a country. Martha guided Dara to a chair and pressed a steaming mug of coffee into her hands. "You drink this," she said gently. "You need to get your warmth back." For the first time since she'd been pushed into the water, the adrenaline began to recede, replaced by a deep, bone-wearying exhaustion. She had been so focused on survival, on the plan, on turning the tables, that she hadn't allowed herself to feel the terror of the moment. Now it washed over her in waves. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the mug. "What happens now?" someone asked from across the room. All eyes turned to Dara. She looked up, surprised to find herself the center of attention. She had never been a leader, just a worker, a survivor. "Now, we make sure he pays," she said, her voice raspy but firm. "For everything." As if on cue, the local news came on the television. A polished anchorwoman with a serious expression looked into the camera. "We have breaking news from Blackwater Parish, where prominent rancher Clayton Thorne has been arrested following a shocking incident on the banks of the Blackwater Bayou." The screen cut to shaky cell phone footage. It was raw, chaotic, but undeniable. They saw Clayton sneer, they saw him shove Dara, they saw the alligator, and they heard his screaming, terrified confession. The anchorwoman's voice returned. "Thorne is facing multiple charges, including assault and violations of the Clean Water Act. His attorney, however, released a statement a few moments ago, calling the incident a carefully orchestrated setup by a disgruntled former employee, and labeling the confession as coerced under extreme duress. The screen changed again, now showing a sharp, clean-shaven man in an expensive suit standing in front of a law office in New Orleans. The Chiron identified him as Benjamin Shaw, Thorne's attorney. My client was the victim of a vicious attack and a baseless act of vigilantism, Shaw said smoothly. We are confident that when the facts come to light, Mr. Thorne will be fully exonerated and Ms. Jackson will be held accountable for her criminal actions. A cold dread settled over the room. The lawyer was slick, confident, and he was already trying to flip the narrative, painting Dara as the villain and Clayton as the victim. He's twisting it, Earl growled, just like they always do. They'll try to bury us in legal fees, another man said, his voice heavy with defeat. We can't fight a man like that, not with his money. The hope that had flared so brightly on the riverbank began to flicker. They had the video, but Clayton Thorne had something more powerful, a system built to protect men like him. Dara watched the television, her exhaustion replaced by a slow-burning fire. They thought they could scare her. They thought they could twist the truth until it broke. After facing down a 12-foot alligator, a slick lawyer in a $1,000 suit seemed far less intimidating. She stood up, her movement steady. Let him try, she said, her voice cutting through the despair in the room. He thinks his money can bury this. He's wrong. He poisoned our water. He made our families sick. He tried to kill me in front of all of you. We have the truth, and we have each other. She looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. He's counting on us to be scared. He's counting on us to give up. Are we going to? A chorus of no filled the small living room. It was hesitant at first, then grew stronger, more defiant. Just then, Dara's old flip phone, which she'd left on the counter to dry, buzzed. She picked it up, not recognizing the number. Hello? Is this Dara Jackson? A woman's voice asked. It was professional, crisp. Who's asking? Dara replied, cautious. My name is Anjali Sharma. I'm an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center. Someone sent us a video from your town. We saw what you did. We saw what Clayton Thorne confessed to. We've been trying to build a case against him for years, and I think you just gave us everything we need. We'd like to offer our services. Pro bono. We want to help you fight back. The room fell silent as Dara listened on the phone. The name Southern Environmental Law Center hung in the air, a term none of them were familiar with, but which sounded powerful, important. Dara's side of the conversation was short, just a series of quiet, yes, and I understand. When she hung up, she looked at the expectant faces around her. A slow smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile she'd had all day. That was a lawyer, she said, a real one, not like his. She said they want to help us, for free. A wave of relief washed over the room. It was one thing to have the truth on their side. It was another thing entirely to have a professional who knew how to wield it. The feeling of being outmatched, of facing an impossible foe, began to recede. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Anjali Sharma and her team descended on Blackwater Creek like a force of nature. They were sharp, focused, and moved with a purpose that inspired confidence. They set up a temporary office in the back room of the town's small community center. They interviewed everyone who was at the riverbank, meticulously collecting their video files and signed affidavits. They took water and soil samples from up and down the bayou, not just near the runoff pipe Dara had identified, but for miles in every direction, creating a comprehensive map of the contamination. Dara was at the center of it all. She transformed from a quiet ranch hand into the unofficial leader of a community movement. She guided Anjali's team through the tangled waterways of the bayou, pointing out areas where the wildlife had vanished, where the cypress trees were turning a sickly yellow. Her deep, generational knowledge of the land was no longer just a skill for herding cattle. It was now crucial evidence in a federal lawsuit. Clayton Thorne, as his lawyer had promised, was out on bail within 24 hours. He returned to his ranch, but remained out of sight, a ghost behind the gates of his sprawling property. But his presence was felt. Strange cars started appearing in town, private investigators hired by his legal team. They tried to intimidate the witnesses, offering them money to change their stories, threatening them with lawsuits of their own. One night, Earl Boudreau's prize-winning vegetable garden was mysteriously salted, killing everything. Another fisherman found the lines on his crab pots cut. They were scare tactics designed to isolate and terrify. But they had the opposite effect. Every act of intimidation only strengthened the community's resolve. The people of Blackwater Creek, who had once been too afraid to even look Clayton in the eye, now stood together. They started a neighborhood watch, documenting every strange car, every threat. They held community meetings, sharing information and offering support. Marcus, the former foreman, proved to be an invaluable asset. Racked with guilt, he came to Dara and Anjali and told them everything. He gave them detailed records of the chemical orders, the dates of the dumping, and the names of the suppliers. He even knew about the second, older runoff pipe that Clayton's father had used decades ago, a secret source of pollution that had been poisoning the bayou for a generation. He became their star witness, a man from the inside, ready to burn down the whole rotten structure. The legal battle escalated. Anjali's team filed a massive class-action lawsuit on behalf of the entire community of Blackwater Creek against Thorne Industries. The EPA, armed with the viral video and Anjali's new data, reopened their investigation with a vengeance, hitting the ranch with subpoenas and search warrants. The criminal case against Clayton for assault moved forward, with the district attorney now under immense public pressure to secure a conviction. Clayton's lawyer, Benjamin Shaw, fought back with everything he had. He filed motion after motion, trying to get the video evidence thrown out, claiming it was an illegal recording and that the confession was inadmissible. He painted Dara in the media as an eco-terrorist, a violent extremist who had entrapped his client. He tried to dig up dirt on every single person who had signed onto the lawsuit, looking for any leverage he could find. The day of the preliminary hearing for the assault charge arrived. It was the first time Dara would face Clayton in a formal setting since the riverbank. The small parish courthouse was packed. Reporters from as far away as New Orleans lined the hallways. The entire town of Blackwater Creek seemed to be there, filling the benches, their faces a sea of support for Dara. When Clayton Thorne walked in, flanked by his lawyers, a hush fell over the courtroom. He looked different. His arrogance was still there, but it was brittle now, a thin veneer over a deep well of fury and fear. He refused to look at the gallery, his eyes fixed forward. Dara walked in moments later with Anjali. She wore a simple, clean dress, her hair pulled back. She didn't look like a victim or a villain. She looked like what she was, a woman who had been pushed too far and had decided to push back. As she walked to the plaintiff's table, she let her gaze sweep over the crowd. Her people. They nodded back at her, their expressions of solidarity giving her strength. Then she looked at Clayton Thorne. For a split second, their eyes met. In his, she saw pure hatred. In hers, he saw unshakable resolve. The battle for Blackwater Bayou was about to begin in earnest, not in the mud and water, but under the cold, unforgiving lights of a courtroom. The Honorable Judge Miller, a man with a reputation for no-nonsense justice, entered the courtroom, and the room fell silent. Benjamin Shaw was on his feet before the judge had even settled into his chair. "Your Honor," Shaw began, his voice smooth and commanding, "we are here today because of a calculated act of extortion by a disgruntled employee. My client, Mr. Clayton Thorne, is the victim here. He was lured to that riverbank, threatened with a wild animal, and forced to make a statement under extreme duress. We are filing a motion to dismiss all charges against my client and to open a criminal investigation into Ms. Dara Jackson for assault with a deadly weapon. The weapon, in this case, being a 12-foot alligator." The audacity of the statement sent a ripple of outrage through the gallery. Judge Miller banged his gavel once. "Counselor, I have read the initial reports. Let's proceed with the prosecution's evidence. Call your first witness." The district attorney called Dara to the stand. She walked calmly, her hand steady, and swore the oath. The DA's questions were simple, allowing Dara to tell her story in her own words. She spoke clearly, detailing the pollution, her report to the EPA, and how Clayton had confronted her. "And what did Mr. Thorne do when you were at the riverbank?" the DA asked. "He told me I didn't know my place," Dara said, her eyes finding Clayton's for a brief, cold moment. "Then he pushed me into the bayou." When it was Shaw's turn to cross-examine, he approached the witness stand with a predatory smile. "Ms. Jackson, you claim you're an expert on this bayou, correct? You know the animals there?" "Yes, sir. I grew up on it." "So you knew that specific area was inhabited by a large, dominant alligator?" "Yes, sir. Old Man Cypress." So, isn't it true," Shaw said, his voice rising, "that when you were in the water, you deliberately provoked this animal? You slapped the water, did you not? You lured it towards the bank with the specific intent to harm or kill my client." "The alligator was already there," Dara said calmly. "I just changed its focus." "You threatened him," Shaw boomed. "You used a wild animal to coerce a false confession from a man fearing for his life." "He was only fearing for his life," Dara replied, her voice cutting through his theatrics. "After he had tried to end mine, I told him to confess to what he did." "Objection! Speculation!" Shaw shouted. "Sustained," the judge said, looking at Dara with a new intensity. "Just answer the questions, Ms. Jackson." After a few more fruitless attempts to rattle her, Shaw dismissed her. The DA then moved to present his primary piece of evidence. The prosecution would like to play the video evidence from the incident. Shaw was on his feet again. "Objection. This footage is inflammatory and prejudicial. The confession was clearly coerced and is inadmissible." "I'll be the judge of that, Counselor," Judge Miller said, his patience wearing thin. "Overruled. Play the video." A large screen was wheeled to the front of the courtroom. But instead of one shaky cell phone video, the screen split into 4 synchronized quadrants. Angeli had worked with the DA's office to compile the footage from 4 different witnesses. The court watched in stunned silence. They saw, from 4 different angles, Clayton sneering, "This is what happens to people who don't know their place." They saw his hands shove Dara's chest. They saw her fall. And then, most damningly, they heard his loud, ugly laugh as she disappeared under the water. The videos continued, showing Dara's controlled survival, the rock being thrown, and Clayton raising his own phone to film what he thought would be her death. Angeli Sharma stood and pointed to the screen. "Your Honor, please note the timestamp. Mr. Thorne is laughing and filming. The alligator is in the water, but it is not a threat to him. He is enjoying the spectacle." The video played on. The court saw Dara slap the water, saw the gator turn, and saw the first flicker of fear on Clayton's face as the predator he intended for her turned its attention to him. Only then, with his own life in perceived danger, did his screaming pleas and his confession begin. The video ended. The courtroom was utterly silent. Benjamin Shaw stood frozen, his face ashen. His entire defense, that the confession was coerced from an innocent victim, had just been obliterated by 4 different angles of the truth. Clayton Thorne wasn't a victim. He was the architect of the whole event, and he had been reveling in it until his weapon turned on him. Judge Miller stared at the frozen screen for a long moment, his face like stone. He looked at Clayton Thorne, whose face was now a mask of purple rage. "Motion to dismiss," the judge said, his voice dripping with ice, "is denied. In fact, based on the evidence I've just seen, I'm adding a charge of attempted murder." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Benjamin Shaw stumbled back as if he'd been physically struck. Clayton Thorne's face went from purple rage to a terrifying dead white. His eyes, fixed on Judge Miller, were wide and unblinking. It was the sound of a switch flipping, the final snap of a mind that could not comprehend defeat. "Attempted murder," Clayton whispered, the words barely audible. Then he roared. It wasn't a word, it was a raw, guttural sound of pure animal fury. Before the bailiffs could react, he launched himself over the defense table, his expensive suit tearing at the seam. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a projectile of hate aimed directly at Dara. "You bitch!" he screamed, his hands outstretched like claws. I'll kill you right here." The gallery erupted in screams. People scrambled back from the railing. Anjali threw an arm in front of Dara, trying to shield her. The two bailiffs, caught off guard by the sheer speed of the assault, were a step too slow. But someone was faster. Marcus, who had been sitting in the front row, moved with the explosive speed of a man who had spent his life working with unpredictable livestock. He threw himself between Clayton and Dara. The impact was brutal. Clayton crashed into Marcus, and the two men went down in a tangle of limbs on the hard courtroom floor. "Get off me, you traitor!" Clayton bellowed, trying to claw his way past Marcus to get to Dara. Then Earl Boudreaux was there, his old fisherman's hands surprisingly strong as he grabbed one of Clayton's flailing arms. Other men from the gallery surged forward, their fear of Clayton finally completely extinguished and replaced by a protective fury. They weren't a mob, they were a wall. They pinned Clayton to the floor, their combined weight and resolve overwhelming his frantic struggles. The bailiffs finally descended, tasers drawn, shouting, "Back up! Everyone, back away!" They hauled a screaming, spitting Clayton Thorne to his feet. His suit was shredded, his face was red, and a trickle of blood ran from a cut on his lip where he'd hit the floor. He was a wild animal in a cage of his own making. Judge Miller stood, his face a thunderous mask of judicial wrath. He banged his gavel repeatedly, the sound cracking like gunshots in the chaotic room. "Order! Order in this court!" The room gradually fell silent, the only sound the ragged, snarling breaths of Clayton Thorne as the bailiffs held him fast. Judge Miller pointed a trembling finger at the disgraced rancher. "Mr. Thorne, you have just committed assault in a federal courtroom. You have threatened a witness. You have shown a complete and utter contempt for this court and for the rule of law." He looked at the bailiffs. "Bail is revoked. Take this man into custody immediately. He will be held without bond until his trial." He then looked at Benjamin Shaw, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "And, Counselor, you can expect a motion for sanctions on your desk by the end of the day for failing to control your client." As the bailiffs dragged him away, Clayton locked eyes with Dara one last time. The hatred was still there, but now it was joined by something else. The hollow, terrifying realization that it was truly over. His money couldn't save him. His power was gone. He was just a man in a torn suit being dragged to a cage. When the heavy courtroom doors slammed shut behind him, a profound silence fell. Then, slowly, the people of Blackwater Creek turned to look at Dara. She hadn't flinched, she hadn't cried out, she had stood her ground, protected by the very community he had terrorized. Dara Jackson stood, her breathing steady, her gaze clear. She watched as the man who tried to erase her was dragged away in chains, his power utterly and finally broken not by an alligator, but by the quiet courage of the people he had wronged for so long. The battle was over. The victory was absolute. The fallout from Clayton Thorne's courtroom meltdown was swift and brutal. With his public confession, his recorded threats, and his final violent outburst, there was no defense left. His legal team quit, citing an irreconcilable breakdown. Faced with the mountain of evidence from the EPA, the class action lawsuit, and Marcus's damning testimony, Clayton Thorne took a plea deal to avoid multiple life sentences. He was found guilty of attempted murder, aggravated assault, and dozens of federal environmental crimes. The judge, making an example of him, handed down the maximum possible sentence under the agreement, 25 years to life in a federal penitentiary. Thorne Industries crumbled. The class action lawsuit, led by Anjali Sharma and the Southern Environmental Law Center, resulted in a historic settlement of over $150 million for the community of Blackwater Creek. The money was placed into a trust, managed by a board of community members, including Earl Boudreau and Martha. It was used to pay for the medical bills of those who had gotten sick, to compensate the fishermen for their lost livelihoods, and to fund a massive multi-year cleanup of the bayou. Thorn Ranch, the symbol of his family's oppressive legacy, was seized and sold off in pieces to pay the fines and settlement, its assets liquidated until nothing was left. The change in Blackwater Creek was slow but steady. EPA cleanup crews became a common sight, their barges and equipment working to dredge the poisoned sediment from the riverbed. Within a year, the strange, oily sheen on the water was gone. 2 years later, the fish began to return. Earl Boudreau took his grandson, now healthy and strong, fishing in the same spot where his grandfather had taught him, and for the first time in a decade, they caught their limit. Sheriff Brody, facing a recall election and a state-level investigation into his cozy relationship with the Thorn family, quietly resigned and moved out of the parish. A new sheriff, a young woman who had grown up in Blackwater Creek, was elected in a landslide. Dara Jackson never went back to being a ranch hand. She couldn't. She had become something more. Using a portion of the settlement funds, she established the Blackwater Bayou Conservancy, a non-profit organization dedicated to the protection and restoration of the local ecosystem. Her office was in the old community center, the same back room where Anjali's team had first set up their war room. She became the fierce, unwavering guardian of the bayou. She worked with scientists, organized volunteers for replanting native vegetation, and established educational programs for local schools. She was no longer just a woman who understood the river. She was its voice. Marcus, given immunity for his testimony, came to her a few months after the trial, hat in hand, asking for any work she could give him. He didn't want a handout. He wanted a chance to make amends. Dara hired him. He became her lead field technician, his knowledge of the Thorn land now being used to identify and map the remaining pollution hotspots. He worked tirelessly, his quiet, steady labor a form of penance and redemption. Sometimes in the early morning light, Dara would take a small skiff out onto the bayou, just as she had done as a child. She cut the engine and just listened to the sounds of the returning wildlife. She'd watch the water now teeming with life, and occasionally she'd see the slow, patient glide of Old Man Cypress, the ancient king of the river, still patrolling his territory. She no longer looked at the water with the memory of fear. Her gaze was not one of a survivor, but of a guardian. The river had been her stage, her weapon, and her salvation. The river always collects its debts, and today the waters of the Blackwater Bayou finally ran clear. Dara Jackson's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured by wealth, influence, or the fear you can instill in others. It is measured by the quiet, unshakable courage to stand up for what is right, even when you believe you are standing alone. Clayton Thorn lived his life insulated by a fortress of money and power, believing he was untouchable, that he could silence any truth by simply throwing it away. But he made one critical, arrogant mistake. He pushed Dara into the one place where his power meant nothing and her knowledge meant everything. He delivered her not to her grave, but to her greatest ally, the Blackwater Bayou. He thought he was the master of the land, but she was a daughter of it, and in that murky water she sealed his fate not with violence, but with a wisdom he could never buy. This victory wasn't just Dara's. It was a triumph for an entire community that had been suffocating under the Thorn family's shadow for generations. In those crucial moments, they transformed. They were witnesses who became warriors, their cell phones evolving from simple recording devices into undeniable weapons of truth. They proved that when people finally decide to stand together, their collective voice can drown out the lies of even the most powerful tyrant. The story of Blackwater Creek is a testament to the idea that justice, like a river, may be diverted, dammed and polluted for a time, but its nature is to flow, and it will always eventually find its way back to the sea, running clean and strong. What Clayton Thorne fundamentally failed to understand is that you can't truly own a place like the bayou, and you can't own the spirit of people who are connected to it. He saw the land as a line item on a balance sheet, a resource to be exploited and discarded. He saw the people as tools, disposable and replaceable. Dara and her community knew the profound truth that they were part of the land, and the land was a part of them. When he poisoned the river, he was poisoning their children, their history, their future. When he attacked her, he attacked them all. And when they finally fought back, they fought with the relentless, patient, and overwhelming force of nature itself. If this story of incredible courage, community, and sweet, sweet revenge resonated with you, and you believe that no one is above the law, show your support by hitting that like button. And if you want to be the first to see more unforgettable stories of justice, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. Every single like and subscription helps us bring these powerful narratives to a wider audience, spreading the message that the fight for what's right is always worth it. We know who our most loyal viewers are, the ones who stick with us through every tense moment and triumphant conclusion. If you're one of them, let us know in the comments below by typing the phrase, "I watched until the end." But don't go anywhere just yet. The story doesn't have to end here. We have another incredible tale of justice ready and waiting for you. It's about a humble, overlooked janitor who is wrongfully fired for exposing his corrupt company's dangerous secrets. But as they escort him out of the building, he reveals a secret of his own that leaves his arrogant boss speechless. He secretly owns the entire company. You will not believe the look on his boss's face. Click the video on your screen right now to watch it. We promise the payoff is worth it. We'll see you there.